Ukraine's MPs hopeful Donald Trump's victory, not a catastrophe for war effort. Complexity of negotiating with Putin may benefit Kyiv, with U.S. defense and security appointments critical. Ukrainian politicians are expressing tentative hopes that the return of Donald Trump to the White House will not necessarily lead to a rapid and humiliating forced peace. An initial 25-minute post-election call on Wednesday, during which the president-elect handed the phone to Elon Musk, is said to have been positive in tone and no specifics of any peace proposals were discussed. Though Trump promised to stop wars in his first speech after his victory over Kamala Harris became apparent last week, there are no settled outlines of a peace plan yet, giving Kyiv breathing space to press its own case. Oleksiy Goncharenko, a Ukrainian opposition MP, said, "I don't think that Trump's victory is a catastrophe. Ukraine is now his business, and if negotiations lead to a disaster, it will be his, like Joe Biden's decision to withdraw from Afghanistan. This is a person who loves to win." Trump is not known to have spoken since his election victory to Vladimir Putin, and Ukrainians emphasize the complexity of negotiating with the Russian president, who they hope may overplay his hand with maximalist demands or irritate the notoriously prickly American leader. At some point, Trump has to present a plan to Putin, and we will see if Putin wants to stick to it. From that moment, there is a new reality, Goncharenko said. In the meantime, we have to work with the U.S. and with U.S. public opinion. Putin has already praised Trump's courage for his defiant behavior after surviving an assassination attempt in July, describing him as a real man, though Moscow has set its goals in invading Ukraine, once described as demilitarization and denazification, remain unchanged. The Russian president congratulated Trump on his victory and said, "He turned out to be a courageous person. People show who they are in extraordinary circumstances. This is where a person reveals himself. And he showed himself, in my opinion, in a very correct manner, courageously. Like a man." He said he was ready for dialogue with Trump. What was said about the desire to restore relations with Russia, to bring about the end of the Ukrainian crisis, in my opinion, this deserves attention at least. On Sunday, the Kremlin's spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, was upbeat but nonspecific. Trump during his election talked about how he perceives everything through deals, that he can make a deal that can lead to peace, he said, though he added campaign trail statements were not always borne out. A day after his phone call with Trump, Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine's president, acknowledged that the president-elect thought he could move fast. "I believe that President Trump really wants a quick decision," he said at a meeting of the European political community in Budapest. "He wants that. It doesn't mean that it will happen this way." Specific proposals for a peace deal in Ukraine from senior Republicans are competing and to some extent contradictory. A critical factor will be Trump's appointments to the State Department and Pentagon, as well as his choice of national security advisor. In June, the retired Lieutenant Gen Keith Kellogg and Fred Fleitz, who previously both served as chiefs of staff in Trump's National Security Council, presented a proposal to Trump that would force Ukraine to negotiate by threatening to cut off military aid, freezing the conflict along the current front lines. In September, J.D. Vance, now the vice president-elect, proposed something similar, a plan that would allow Russia to take control of the 20% of Ukraine it currently occupies, and stipulating that Ukraine would never be allowed to join NATO. Another plan partly proposed by Mike Pompeo, a former Secretary of State under Trump now considered to be a candidate for defense secretary, involves a de facto partition based on the current front lines while lifting all restrictions on the type of weapons Ukraine can obtain and use, including British Storm Shadow missiles. This would be paid for with money obtained from Russian foreign exchange reserves. $50 billion in loans from G7 members was announced last month. Over the weekend, the Trump campaign distanced themselves from a comment made by another campaign advisor, Brian Lanza, who said, "Crimea is gone," arguing the occupied territories were lost for good. Lanza does not speak for Trump, a spokesperson for the Republicans said. All such proposals are diametrically opposed to Zelensky's own victory plan, presented publicly last month, which called for NATO membership plus unrestricted use of Western weapons to force a restoration of its internationally recognized territory. Across Ukraine there is a certain fatalism. Maria Avdiva, a Kiev-based fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute think tank, said, "I think Ukrainians have already learned the lesson that we have to count on ourselves, a refrain that crops up repeatedly in conversation." Ukraine is already struggling on the battlefield to a degree not seen since the spring of 2022, particularly on the southern part of the Eastern Front, where Ukraine has lost 9 kilometers in a week in some areas as Russia presses forward aggressively, incurring, according to UK estimates, numbers of troops killed and wounded of as high as 1,354 a day. The numbers of cases of Ukrainian desertion, 18,196, and soldiers going absent without leave, 35,307, between January and September are double those of the whole of 2023, according to leaked figures from the Prosecutor General's office, suggesting a growing weariness in parts of the armed forces. Gen Oleksandr Syrsky, Ukraine's most senior military commander, said on Saturday, "The situation remains challenging and shows signs of escalation. The enemy, leveraging its numerical advantage, is continuing offensive actions and is focusing its main efforts on the Pokrovsk and Kurakhove directions."